This video was brought to you by CuriosityStream, which is, just for this week, at its cheapest price ever of $11.59 a year. Get access to exclusive TLDR content and all of our videos ad-free by signing up to the CuriosityStream Nebula Bundle deal, which is linked in the description. Despite being a NATO member since 1952, Turkey has never quite fit in. After all, Turkey's accession into NATO in the early 50s was more of a marriage of convenience than a natural alliance. And today, Erdogan is involved in multiple tiffs with a number of other NATO members, most recently concerning Swedish and Finnish accession into the organization. So in this video, we're going to be taking a look at why Turkey even joined NATO in the first place, some of the quarrels that Turkey currently has with NATO and other NATO members, and whether NATO could actually end up kicking Turkey out of the alliance. So to understand why Turkey joined NATO in the first place, we need to do a bit of history. Turkey and its predecessor, in the form of the Ottoman Empire, have never really got along well with the Russians. Before Turkey's accession into NATO, the Ottoman and Russian Empire had fought an impressive 10 wars over a 300-year period, with the First Russo-Turkish War beginning in 1568, and the last, known as the 10th Russo-Turkish War, ending in 1878. Much of this fighting was over the Caucasus and the Crimean Peninsula, and most of the wars were won decisively by the Russians, which is why, after World War I, the Soviets ended up in control of both the Caucasus and Crimea, and why so many Turks have a historical antipathy towards Russia. In 1913, the Ottomans were soundly beaten in the First Balkan War, where the Balkan League, made up of Bulgaria, Serbia, Greece, and Montenegro, pushed the Ottomans all the way back to Istanbul, which was then known as Constantinople. And their defeat in that war earned the Ottomans the nickname of the sick man in Europe, and things only got worse in World War I, when they made the mistake of siding with the Central Powers. True to historical form, the Ottomans ended the war with an attack against the Russians via the Black Sea, but were swiftly defeated by the Russians in the Caucasus. Then, under the terms of the 1918 armistice, Constantinople was occupied by Allied troops, the Ottoman Empire was broken up, and the Sultanate was abolished. And then another treaty, signed in 1920, forced the Ottomans to cede basically all territory not occupied by ethnic Turks, and then yet more, including the creation of two new autonomous zones: the Kurdish region in the east and Smyrna in the west. Both regions even had their own regional parliaments and were due to hold plebiscites on Kurdish independence and accession into Greece respectively in 1923. That treaty also gave the Allies control over the Ottomans' national finances and imposed massive restrictions on the Ottomans' military capabilities. Somewhat unsurprisingly then, the Turks didn't much like this, and the treaty signatories were stripped of their citizenship by the Grand National Assembly, led by General Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. Ataturk then led the Turks to victory in the Greco-Turkish War of 1922, which concluded in 1923 with the Treaty of Lausanne. From Turkey's point of view, Lausanne was a slight improvement, because it gave Turkey complete control over Anatolia and slightly extended Turkey's border with Greece. Nonetheless, though, this meant that within the early 20th century, the Ottoman Empire had been reduced from a huge empire spanning large parts of Europe, Asia, and North Africa to what was an essentially small, relatively impoverished state with a below-average European military. Economic growth in the 20s and 30s was irregular. By the time the Second World War rolled round, Turkey's military was in pretty poor shape, with them preoccupied by Kurdish rebellions in the west. Ultimately, this meant that Turkey had to play it safe and decided to remain neutral for most of the war. They did nearly ally with Germany after the Axis powers took control of Greece, signing the 1941 German-Turkish Treaty of Friendship, but they wisely stayed neutral until February 1945, when, with the Soviets approaching approaching Berlin and a German defeat looking inevitable, Turkey declared war on Germany and Japan. This smart, if cynical move, earned Turkey some goodwill with the big players within the Allies, like the US and UK, who went on to form NATO. Anyway, this is the context in which Turkey applied to join NATO. In the early 50s, the Cold War was heating up, and Turkey was enjoying a moment of relatively warm relations with the rest of Europe, and Turkey's historic enemy, in the form of the Soviet Union, had basically surrounded them. Soviet troops were stationed in the Balkans and the Caucasus, while Soviet diplomats were supporting Kurdish rebels who were gaining influence in Syria and Iraq. Turkey apparently decided that neutrality was therefore not an option, and to properly deter the Soviets, it needed to join NATO, which happened in 1952. NATO accepted Turkey within the organization because Turkey's strategic geography gave the alliance an advantage over Russia. But despite this, Turkey has never really fit in with the other NATO members. After all, it has an ongoing border dispute with Greece, which escalated in the 2000s with the discovery of oil reserves in the Mediterranean, and nearly spilled out into a full-on war in the summer of 2020, before Greece signed a pointed defense pact with France. It's not just that either. Since joining NATO, Turkey has experienced 3 military coups, and Erdogan has more recently nudged Turkey away from being a secular democracy towards a more presidential system with an Islamic tinge. Things got particularly heated after the failed coup in 2016, which Erdogan blamed on Islamic scholar Fethullah Gulen. And that's difficult because Gulen currently lives in Pennsylvania, but the US has so far refused Erdogan's extradition demands. And this is all pretty hard to square with NATO's stated political aims of promoting democratic values, as well as not really matching its membership action plans, which often require substantial democratic political reforms from candidate countries, something which Turkey themselves may not even be living up to. Turkey also has different geopolitical priorities to the rest of NATO. Much of NATO, especially its eastern flank, has a myopic focus on Russia, but Turkey's geopolitical priority is usually the Middle East, which other NATO members just don't really care about. In fact, Erdogan was even openly bitter about the fact that NATO sent extra troops to Lithuania in an attempt to deter Russian aggression in 2017, while they simultaneously refused to send troops to help Turkey when it decided to go into Syria in 2016, nominally to defeat the terrorist threat posed by ISIS. Turkey was also sanctioned by the US after they bought Russian air defense systems, and Erdogan's weird frenemy bromance thing with Putin has provoked suspicion from some NATO leaders. More recently, Turkey has also taken a softer line on Russia than its NATO allies. Turkey originally positioned itself as a mediator between Ukraine and Russia, and towed Moscow's line in refusing to describe the invasion as a war in the first few days of the conflict. And that's kind of continued, because to this day, Turkey is the only NATO member that hasn't sanctioned Russia. And Erdogan hit the headlines yet again last week for suggesting that Turkey would veto Swedish and Finnish accession into NATO, apparently because of their support for the Kurdistan Workers' Party. Now, we should say that while there are some Kurdish diasporas within Sweden and Finland, there's little evidence to support Erdogan's claim that either the Swedish or Finnish government actively supports the PKK or any other Kurdish militant group. And it's entirely possible that Erdogan's just bringing this up in order to improve his poll numbers and hopefully squeeze some concessions out of NATO. Nonetheless, Turkey's divergence on this point from the rest of NATO is a symptom of the underlying fact that Turkey was never really a natural NATO member. And some commentators have even suggested kicking Turkey out of the alliance altogether in order to make space for the more natural Nordic candidates. So, on to the last part of this video. Could Turkey actually be expelled from NATO? Well, the short answer is no, even if Erdogan did end up blocking Nordic accession. For starters, there's no legal mechanism for actually kicking someone out of NATO, and doing so would introduce an unnecessary uncertainty into the world's most successful military alliance. But more importantly, Turkey is just far too important to NATO. Turkey's control over the Turkish Straits helps NATO contain Russia, and Turkey's military, recently made famous by the success of their drone strikes in Ukraine, is one of the most powerful militaries within the alliance. So that's ultimately why NATO have turned a blind eye to Turkey's various hiccups in the past, and Turkey has had some serious hiccups. So, while other member states might become increasingly hostile to Turkey, it seems there's not a whole lot they can actually do to get rid of their troublesome member, an issue which the EU knows all too well. Speaking of the EU, if you want to dive deeper into the troubles of the Union, then we have a bunch of bonus content available on Nebula. You've likely heard us talk about our streaming service Nebula before, but it's at its lowest price ever right now. So give me 1 minute to explain to you why you should care. And as always with TLDR, there's 3 reasons. Firstly, signing up to Nebula gets you a ton of additional TLDR content. We release some of our videos exclusively on Nebula, and those are full-length proper videos, as well as a super fun studio tour. We also release longer versions of some of our videos. In fact, we release a longer version of our show, The Daily Briefing, on Nebula every single day. That's a lot more TLDR for you every day. Secondly, everything on Nebula is ad-free. And that's not just TLDR either. That's all of your favorite creators like Wendover Productions, Real Life Law, Polymatter, Legal, Half as Interesting, and tons of others. And it's all ad-free. So there's no mid-rolls, and I wouldn't even be talking to you right now. Thirdly, signing up and watching on Nebula really helps the channel. And here's the maths. TLDR viewers signing up to Nebula has significantly improved our ability to monetize our content, which has allowed us to begin employing more staff and investing in new technology to improve our content. You might not notice it quite yet, but you soon will, and signing up is super helpful to make that possible. So, you're convinced, right? Did I do it in a minute? Who knows, it's pre-recorded. But anyway, if you did want to sign up for Nebula, the cheapest way to do so is with the Curiosity Stream Nebula bundle deal. That way, if you sign up to Curiosity Stream at the crazy low price of $11.59 a year, then you'll also get free access to Nebula as long as you're a paying member. That's right, 2 streaming services for less than $1 a month. And by the way, that crazy low price only lasts for this week. And it's worth saying that Curiosity Stream is awesome. It contains absolutely boatloads of high-quality documentaries on all kinds of topics that I know that TLDR viewers are going to love. So if you want both services for $11.59 a year, this week only, then the link is down below. And if not, well, I can't say I haven't tried to convince you. Thanks for your support.